So again, one of the really fantastic things I think about this workshop is that we bring so many different perspectives together. And so our three panelists are sort of the embodiment of those perspectives from our user perspective, research perspective, and products perspective. I wanted to touch on something that I thought was a theme across all of your talks, which was in different ways, you all touched upon kind of the errors that AI can make. And I think that maybe there were different approaches that we talked about in terms of how we might address those. In terms of your research, I think you talked, Eric, about kind of changing the algorithm, developing new algorithms. I think in Brent's talk, you talked a little bit about sort of almost like the design perspective, like how do we turn what we can do and how do we think about what we need to address turning to product. And then Thomas, I think you also had a great perspective of we need to be involving users in making these decisions. So I thought that if you want, I thought all of you, maybe with that little bit of a prompting, I could call all of you on the spot, think about not only how do you think about errors, but from this session, these sessions that you just enjoyed, is there how do we think about this going forward, especially as models get more powerful, larger, things are kind of getting more complicated. That's too heavy about Eric. Start to my right here. We'll start with you.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I learned a lot from this workshop, especially from Thomas and yeah. And so usually when we listen to the reports, then we talk about because once algorithm and that results. And even when we talk about fairness and trustworthiness, but they are mostly from the research side. And for example, when I viewed visual question answering in the past few years, I felt like this problem is mostly solved. Like it's like the accuracy is not increasing that much, but from Torrance point, I did learn that, oh wow, there are so many lower challenges. And when you apply those technologies onto the real world, like exactly like the 20%, it might be the hardest to achieve, but that's exactly what we should learn. Not only engineers or income, but also the researchers. And speaking of the advances for blind people, then I think we all realize we need to with any user like or visual impact. Yeah, it's really responsible.
Would you like to add anything?
Sure. I was thinking about the question in terms of the track and what about another example? So I guess I think there's a level of context, but there's a level of responsibility, I guess, that the user has as well. So for example, sometimes I might be looking for, let's just say a pair of socks. And I take a picture of it to determine are these white socks or are they black? I'm not that fancy with my socks, and we're going to white socks and black socks. And so occasionally, and I realize because depending on where and how I take the picture, there could be some reflection. I might be in front of a mirror, there's a reflection involved, but the answer that I get might say something like gray or brown. Well, in that case, those to me are probably my black socks, right? I can figure that out because they're darker socks. So the technology isn't perfect, but I got the information. I was able to get the information that I needed. So there's that level that as a user of the technology, I have to sort of bring it. Now, if I was a really exotic sock person, that might not be good because I probably would have a bunch of different colors. And so therefore the need for me to be exact might be different. So in that's a sort of silly example. I think there'd be really examples where I'm not going to trust the the technology as much if it was, medication. And unless there was something that I noticed that, you know, so I might not take that for people with medication, because now I'm not sure, is it ibuprofen or is this something stronger? So I guess I just think about it in terms of what I, as a user, like what's my part of this quote unquote contract. That I think is that we have to think about. Whatever we are. Yeah, think about it.
That's a quick follow, because I'm super curious. I think we worry a lot in this kind of field of study about people being accidentally misled. And so I think what your perspective is very good one, which, we shouldn't think that people are just going to naively drive off, because they have to take some responsibility. Are there cases that you think might be more subtle, where technology could mislead, or we could actually maybe there's a way to approach the design of the technology so it's less likely to mislead?
That's likely to see. Don't know. Again, I think we're thinking really specifically, right? Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, no worries. It's a hard question. I think it's one we're grappling with. But maybe actually, or maybe, well, you don't have to answer that question. You can answer the original question if you want, but did you ever?
Yeah, let me answer the original question. Then let's think about it. For your initial question, I think AI models, it will make mistakes. We will never change it. No matter how far away the technology evolves, there will be mistakes. But the problem is, how are we thinking about these mistakes? And one particular area I want to talk about is about AI fairness. Like probably 5-10 years ago, like this was not a very hot topic. Like people didn't pay too much attention in this area. But recently, especially within these maybe 3 years each, like this is growing like hotter and hotter. People are indeed like paying attention to this. For example, like in our product, we want to add some like description for people to describe like if this person, like how old this person and the perceived gender of this person and like the clothing wise, everything. And we have to go through a very complicated review of all of this information. Even for some features, we think they may be very safe. For example, clothing. Like I can say this is a t-shirt. It sounds really safe, right? But in reality, in some like different places, they may have different religions, different cultures, and you have to use some specific terms for specific clothing, and which could be problematic. As a product team, sure, this like gives us a lot of hard time to release our feature, because every feature it needs to go through a bunch of reviews. We need to prove, we need data to prove like this is fair, this is reasonable, this doesn't harm any like any culture, any region. But still, I think this is the right thing to do. So back to the original question, what do I think of errors? I think error is actually sometimes good thing for us to pushing the boundary of our technology and to make our technology more responsible.
Yeah. So I love the fact that the technology is also sort of maybe the technology I'm thinking about is cultural competence, right? And so we talk about that all the time. Well, in audio description, like that's so important because technology is, well, yes, and human beings are still struggling with being culturally competent. Like we need to not only respect culture, but also to understand what you don't understand. And understand the need that you might need to do that research. So is this a t-shirt or is this something else, right? It's not the given that you are struggling with. Very important thing.
And so the audience, feel free to also ask questions. I can keep continuing discussion, but come up to the mic if you'd like to ask a question, or if you're on Zoom, I think I could see someone type something. Oh, someone type something. Okay, perfect. So this is primarily for Thomas.
I would love to hear a dialogue on how can we design solutions that end users can or should trust?
I mean, how can we design it? I think it's about taking everything that we're talking about into consideration, right? Like, there's that level of research, there's that level of public comment, there's that disclosure in the beginning to let people know what our responsibilities are as the technology, as consumer of the technology. And I think also a big part of trust is the response to the community, right? So when a community is saying, whether it's we labeled our stuff incorrectly, well, how do you respond to it? Because it's just like a human relationship. If I tell a loved one, I don't like it when you did that, right? Or I have a problem with this, and it's continuously done, then my level of trust that this is, that you're taking me into your consideration is going to go down if I don't see any sort of result. I think that's a big part of it. It's a relationship. We have a relationship as a user base and a technology company that needs to be treated as such, as a relationship. I can't go into the technical details of what can be done, but I think thinking about it from that perspective as a person, what you would want in terms of how you think about trust. And I'm just going to go back to what I know. Contact.
And that's really great. I guess, all right, how do you think about that? Do you have processes for incorporating user feedback? Have you gotten a lot of, to the extent you can talk about it,
Yeah.
how does that work?
Yeah, so in my presentation, there is one thing I said, like, it's really hard to get something like work 80%, but it's really hard to get the rest 20% done. We have a bunch of those features. They are still like under development. Basically, it's not working. It's working like for 80% of time, but still we want when we release some features, we want it to work for most of cases. We don't want like our users to come to us saying, okay, look how it doesn't work in this XYZ case. So we have a really high standard on our product. That's also why like you can probably see like Lookout doesn't update quite often, but whenever we update, we are sure, like at least 90% sure, like our new feature will work for everyone or like for most of the use cases. Yeah, so I think that's a standard we need to keep in mind for the product.
Eric, I have a question for you related to this as well. Obviously, you can address the general topic of trust. I guess I wonder, part of trust is building this relationship and kind of responding to feedback. Do you have thoughts on how models can or already do allow for, say, changes or personalization or however else you might interpret this human feedback that you get?
Oh, yeah. So, recently, our lab is in the new key participate in the art class challenges, where we are basically developing tools that can probably be working users so the content provide like social patterns. And for that, we are incorporating the human user feedback into our model design and model development. So, and in general, even for ChatGPT, data is not of that it's still some blind spots. So I think from technical perspective, reinforcement learning or human learning or human learning in the coordination to address this. But meanwhile, I think it's really essential to have interactive learning, right, which can incorporate those human data in a format.
So I guess, one good question right now. So one thing I often, the perspective I often take with technology development, including assistive technology, is one where I like to think of, well, what are the people going to be doing in this future that we might imagine technology could be? And I wonder if you could all take a little bit of time to think about it and then immediately respond without much real reflection. Wonder if you look forward 5 years from now, each from your own perspective, given some imagined progression of where your vision and artificial intelligence will get us in 5 years, what are the people going to be doing? And so, in particular, I'll go back just in order so you a little bit of a breather. Thomas, imagine that in the future, in 5 years, computer vision, AI has progressed a lot. What that means, up to you. What will people who are blind be doing with it? How will they be interacting with it? What will change or not?
I think that kind of goes to what I was talking about. My hope is that it would lead to more net access to independence. And so my hope is, and again, knowing that that is different for everyone. But I think a lot about, again, that level of unemployment. So, I mean, it's a fact. It's 50 to 75% unemployment within the blind community. That's nuts. That's nuts. And so I think one of the things, when we talk about AI, there's this sometimes there's this idea that at some point in the future, people can just live and we don't have to work. That's not going to be our life, right? So I think that will always be a need. And I think people want to work, people want to live their lives. So my whole thing is that the technology would really enable. And again, some part of that is that's on the technology, but it would just be fantastic to be able to have access to the thing we want access to, just like anybody else, with some anonymity. I think anonymity is a really good thing. It's something different when you have to ask people for X, Y, and Z than it is to just be able to sort of seamlessly do that and access that information yourself, and then do whatever it is that she wants to do. So if it is employment, if it is access to spiritual information, if it just makes your daily life better, if you're a baker and you can just now independently access the things that you need to do to bake bread, then that's progress. Because you're just able to live your life. You do what you want to do, and that's
Great lead in potentially for you, because I was going to ask you, what products are you going to be developing? It sounds like, Thomas has some great ideas here.
Yeah.
What will you be doing? You'll be 5 years from now, you're at Google, let's say, and you're working.
Yeah, that's a good question. So should we make sure all of I'm saying below they are my imaginary? Oh, I don't know if any of this will be true, but I'm thinking maybe in 5 years later I will be a lookout user. It's not because I will be blind or whatever. Is what if we can make lookout work or useful for even people like me, or just anyone. For example, now we are talking about VQA, we're talking about the image description, everything. Saying I'm going to a museum and there are maybe some paintings on the wall, and I have no idea of those paintings. But with wearing glass, and then I can use the glass, use the glass camera, and then ask lookout, okay, lookout, tell me more about this painting. And then it can just tell me who paints this, and maybe some stories about it. And then I can walk around the museum to see more information. And maybe it can even guide me to other paintings this artist painted, right? And another case, maybe when I'm at home and I want to do some cooking, and I grabbed some things, materials, I don't know how to cook, and then I just look up, okay, tell me how to cook this. And I think in 5 years, we have a good chance to make all of this work. But so at that time, I may be a lookout for a user by myself.
Right, well, accessibility often leads the way, as we would say, and so I think this idea of kind of just pervasive access and understanding of visual information and then incorporating that into daily routines in whatever way makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Eric, what are we gonna have to do? What are you gonna do to make all that possible? What are you gonna be doing? Are you gonna be out of the job in 5 years to solve all the research problems?
I don't know. I think some days, hold on, it's this problem. We can ask AI assistant to probably talk to. And but in 5 years or in 10 years, I think it could be more like collaboration between humans and AI. So right now, some AI tools may not be that necessary for some human users, but in 5 days, the AI tools would be necessary for probably all human users, and they would be more and more personalized. And then the human AI collaboration is really important that it would not be just like human guiding AI, for example, AI instructing human in lots of domains, which would require the joint decisions between human and human. So it's really essential to that humans and AI systems should understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. So you can imagine a portal, personalized portal for many users, and which understand this particular user's strengths and weaknesses, and then human user can use this AI portal to do lots of things. So like for people with disabilities, then the AI could play an inconvenience for human users. Human users can be qualified for lots of jobs that cannot be done by the. So I really agree that in the future, the long run, AI could play a essential role in lowering the accessibility. So I'm positive about AI. So but of course we should be aware of the risks.
Go ahead. We have one question after you. We'll have one question on Zoom.
So there's been obviously a lot of vision classes over the years. Do you think the newest devices like the Apple Vision Pro, is there still a missing ingredient, or does the LiDAR scanner and the stereo cameras and all that stuff sort of, what else do you think would be needed in that sort of part of the solving?
Whatever you'd like to take.
I can start. But to be fair, because I'm an employee from Google, it's probably not very appropriate for me to talk about a product from another company. But from my personal view is, I think for the wearable devices, the two major constraints are, one is the battery, and the other one is the computational power. And I don't see the Vision Pro by myself, so I don't know. But I'm wondering how good it could be on these two cases. If if it only works for 1 or 2 hours, then it's not that useful, right? We need to keep improving on those. But we will see. I still don't know too much about that.
But personally, I'm very excited about the Apple Vision Pro, but certainly right now, I don't think most people have the access to it. So we are still only seeing the demo, and so I will need to wait for the real product. I will need to check out.
And then in terms of the access, at French point as well. Access to the document. Obviously, that comes down, not going on, but that's always a working. When it comes to any sort of technology, that whether it be specific to people with disabilities or not. That's like, and it seems like even within the blind community, there's the haves and the have nots. And, you know, to have a subscription to something like Ireland, you know, it's certain dollars when it comes with play, it brings with it some incredible access that I think everyone really should have that question. So I think it's the same thing. Yeah, I don't know that much stuff.
Repeat the question on Zoom here. So Donna, love to hear Eric's thoughts, particularly given his work on counterfactual prompt learning work. Is there evidence that the model does a better job in reasoning based on the visual evidence and the image rather than other spurious correlations? And I'll save the rest. Did I capture your question? Is there evidence that the model does a better job in reasoning based on the visual evidence in the image rather than other spurious correlations?
What's the question is, how the counterfactual prompt learning method and improve the results based on multiple visual features. I'm a little bit confused about.
We're gonna give Donna a second to maybe help us clarify. One follow-up, Tom. I have a question. So there's all kinds of different headsets that have been out there, all those like, you know, head-mounted cameras and everything else. I was wondering, like, do you have thoughts on like what would convince you? Let's say it was affordable by some definition. What would convince you to actually wear them? Like, what would be is there like a killer app or something that you would think, yeah, now it does that, so we're gonna wear it?
Well, there's that. I mean, there's some of the stuff I would really like. Like I like it. I'm used to it. But again, that if there were glasses, number one for me, glasses that would really fit my face. There's not many that fit my face. Okay. And so there's that. But there's the other rating that happens with technology. I remember years ago when folks were making use of the GPS before we had it. And it involved you having a laptop or a device the size of a laptop strapped to you on, as well as this other GPS sort of receiver. And there's some headphones. And I'm like, I don't want to walk around like that. Like there's the othering aspect of some of the technology. And again, I know it's a project, it's a progressive thing. It takes a while to make it small. But no, I mean, I think some of the technology is fantastic. Like I'm a big fan of indoor navigation. They work wonderful. Like the ones that I've used. And so I would consider definitely getting glasses, especially now that they have the phone conducted audio. I would consider it, as long as but it has to look good. I'm a little vain, but I guess it's just, I'm already standing out, right? When you have the white beam, you already stand out. I don't think I need the icing on me to make me stand out.
And then, I guess there's a follow-up question. So, Thomas and Horan, Donna was wondering, is it important that models reason based on the correct visual evidence? And you could kind of take that in a few different directions, I think. But we talked, Eric talked in this talk about how models sometimes, you know, make mistakes because they sort of make up things that don't exist in images because of correlation somewhere in their data, so the visual evidence isn't there. A lot of times, actually, that can maybe be useful in certain ways, right? Because it actually is pretty likely that if something's catching a frisbee in their mouth, it's not a human, it's probably a dog. So you can't get it off. So how important is, I guess, that, how important is it the model, is it that the model is reasoning based on correct visual evidence?
Yeah, we have this issue with the image Q&A feature as well. We like internally we call this like the model illusion, or yeah, if I remember the name correctly. Basically, is the model will make up something about a question. For example, if I like there is a picture of a human, and I just like how old is he? Maybe it's just a back. The back of this person. So the model has no idea how old this person is, but the model will say like 48 or something, some number. And there are some other cases like there is no reason why this model will give that result, but the model did. And from a product perspective, we think this is like a bad experience for our users, because think about it, like for blind people, like they will probably use lookup as a ground truth. So if we give them some like makeup information, then they won't be able to trust lookup anymore. So we'd rather to give user like concept but accurate information rather than like this maybe some illusion.
It's funny that you say like made up information, but it's making me think like, there's an app that I use for that. I took a picture of selfie and it described me as a 30, 40-year-old man.
Hey,
Boy, it's fantastic information. So you can make that up already. It was quite interesting. So I think the reason why the model open information because we're not the vending cells, the models tend to exactly the skills situation. So it doesn't only capture the skills purpose, but also exactly. So that's why it's very important to be contractful, please think of the alternative scenario that wouldn't be observed in the feedback.
We are really out of time, but I have one last question and hopefully be quick. Because I'm gonna ask you to keep to like a sentence, because that's like these little random challenges are fun, you know. Okay, so here's the challenge. So we talked about all of this fantastic progression that we've made, all of this progress. And we talked a little bit on this panel even about some of the things we might see in the future. I wonder if you could kind of take it back. Like, what's the biggest challenge you think that we're going to need to solve in the next 5 years to make some of the better outcomes we've talked about actually come true and avoid any of the negative ones to worry about? And I hesitate to pick on anyone, but now I'm giving you a bunch of things, got to make up an answer, make it short.
Actually, I'm ready because it's already in my slide. In the last, I think the last 2 slides, I said, let's try closing the gap. Because I see this gap between the technology and actual product is probably will go increasing over years. For example, the VQA model, like generative AI models, they're powerful, but they are also expensive, they are big, and it's hard to make them, all of them accessible to everyone. And how can we close this gap? How can we make sure that all the new technologies we build, they could be accessible for everyone? They are built for everyone, not for some elites, just for some researchers. So that's my point. Let's try closing the gap.
I guess the thing that I would just say about it is center. I don't know whether, I don't know how, but you center units. I think that's an important part of the overall team. And technology trustable, usable, relevant to all involved. I think for the development in the house, we have to arrows, like
early stage, we do symbolic life, right? It's no learning at all. And then keep learning just the life, and then we spend a few years to focus on model-based learning. And now it's more like data-driven learning. We still have data and the model size to do lots of incredible things. In the future, we focus on human-centered learning, including the personalization we talked about and the human AI evolution. So, on my lab, I would focus on human-centered learning. So I guess we should this is human.
Yes, well, thank you so much. You heard it right here. Three biggest challenges are closing the gap between like the best performing models and what's easily accessible to everybody, keep things human centered, actually making all this progress while keeping trust in systems and keeping things at the human experience at the center of it. And then how do we actually enable that visualization and that deeply personal human technology that we all think is probably needed. We don't really know how to do yet. So that's the conclusion of our panel. I want to thank our panelists, our keynote speakers again. And do we have any poster presenters here in the room? I think there are no poster presenters, at least in the room, and maybe at the conference. Is that true? Possibly? Okay. So then I think we're actually done. I'll turn it over.